Welcome back to the Sting of Scorpion C31, and today I'll be talking about Prince Fluff and Yin-yarn. Without a further ado, let's get to it. Prince Fluff and Yin-yarn. Prince Fluff makes his first appearance in Kirby's Epic Yarn and its remake, Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn. He is the ruler of Patchland. Patchland, or also known as the Yarn World, most or if not all of its citizens and structures are of course made all of yarn. Patchland is made out of 7 pieces of land. It is all held together by what is known as the magic yarn. Appearance-wise, Prince Fluff is identical to Kirby in shape and size. Prince Fluff also has a similar personality to Kirby's. Like Kirby, he adores eating. Although he can't eat as much as Kirby, he is also slightly smarter and more serious than his pink friend. He is very playful and innocent. Despite all this, it is truly unknown if Kirby and Prince Fluff are truly related, especially considering Prince Fluff is, well, you know, made of yarn, meaning someone crafted him, which means he's sentient, right? And although Prince Fluff seems to hold a degree of responsibility over Patchland, his roles are not entirely explained, and it is unknown if there is even a king or queen, even despite there being a king's throne. However, we do know for a fact that Prince Fluff, or what appears to be him, and his people have presumably been around for quite a long time. Since ancient times, this is first provided to us by the description of the fossil from Fossil Reef, a fossil from an ancient sea. This is also provided to us in the form of cave paintings, which can be found in Cool Cave along with in Mole Hole. These paintings tell us of Prince Fluff and his people making different types of food and rejoicing over its creation, as well as them making weapons of sorts, such as spears, along with bows and arrows. Now, let's get into the plot of Kirby's Epic Yarn. The story begins with Yin-yarn, a yarn sorcerer from Patchland, wreaking havoc in both Patchland and Dreamland. But his work in Patchland was already complete. He unleashed yarn monsters all over Patchland, stole one of a pair of magical socks, and then unraveled the pieces of magic yarn holding Patchland together, splitting it into 7 pieces. He then used the magic yarn to create bosses to stop heroes from reuniting Patchland. As Prince Fluff later explains, the magical socks function as portals to each other. But with Patchland in pieces, that power has now become lost. Yin-yarn's sock now transports his victims directly into Patchland, which he controls, and turns them into yarn in the process, and Kirby would soon become one of his victims. Kirby walks by a bush and notices a tomato with an M on top of it. Thinking it to be a Maxim tomato, he starts to inhale to eat it just as Yin-yarn appears, who starts to introduce himself to Kirby. Yin-yarn gets angry at Kirby for eating his magic Metamato and sends him into Patchland by using the magic sock he had earlier stolen. Kirby finds himself in Patchland, where everything is of course made of yarn, and due to the sorcerer's magic, Kirby himself as well. Just then, he saw a yarn monster chasing a yarn boy. Kirby tries to inhale the monster, but the air goes right through his body. Unsure of what to do, but still wanting to help, Kirby somehow transforms into a car and drives off with the yarn boy, whom is later known as Prince Fluff. It turns out that the magic Metamato Kirby inhaled earlier had given him the ability to transform into different things at will. Note, Prince Fluff is already able to use such abilities. So yeah. Kirby and his new friend, Prince Fluff, then go on an adventure to restore both of their worlds. Along the journey, we see King Dedede and Meta Knight, whom both were ambushed by Yin-yarn and thrown into Patchland, where they'd both be turned to yarn and set under his control. Of course, Kirby and Prince Fluff would free them from Yin-yarn's control and manage to beat all the yarn monsters whom were holding the pieces of magic yarn, and Patchland is stitched back together. And so, Kirby and Prince Fluff then use the restored magic sock to make their way down to a completely overtaken Dreamland to give chase to Yin-yarn. But unfortunately for Kirby and Prince Fluff, Yin-yarn had ingeniously discarded the magic sock so he couldn't be tracked. Funny enough, all it takes for Yin-yarn to come out of hiding is the ringing of a bell. So, Kirby and Prince Fluff face off against Yin-yarn, and of course, Kirby and Prince Fluff emerge victorious. But what's this? It turns out that Yin-yarn's knitting needles were the true beings behind all of this madness, and according to his Japanese cast description, his body was merely a disguise, and that these sentient knitting needles are brothers. We truly never get to find out the reason why these knitting needles did what they did. They even state that they have no idea on what to do exactly with Dreamland after they've taken over it. Even so, it's clear that these knitting needles must have had some type of bad influence for them to just take such extreme measures. Perhaps in similar regards to the Paint Sisters, made for a purpose, but ending in failure, thrown aside, forgotten, abandoned. Especially if you take into account the fact that these knitting needles have the powers and capabilities of making worlds turn completely into yarn. I wouldn't be surprised if these knitting needles played some part in Patchland's creation, only to get tossed aside after it was done with its only purpose, and eventually grew sentient over time from the influence. Of course, the only real civilization known for having such powers and capabilities to make a trinket like that are the Ancients. But who knows, it's not confirmed and to each their own. Let's get back on track here though. The knitting needles would then use the power of the magic Metamato to transform, while we instead see an extra piece of magic yarn. The knitting needles use it to then transform into Mega Yin-yarn, which resembles a tank. Kirby and Prince Fluff defeat Yin-yarn and yeet the knitting needles all the way back to Patchland, presumably breaking them, as Dreamland is restored back to its original state, with all whom were affected are reverted back to normal. Prince Fluff thanks Kirby for all his help, and before leaving, hands Kirby the magic sock Yin-yarn had stolen, so Kirby can easily visit him anytime he'd like. Oh, before we wrap things up, here are a few fun facts. Prince Fluff was actually planned to be a playable dream friend in Kirby Star Allies, but was scrapped. Yeah, sad. I'll leave a link to a video of mine talking about all that in the description below. Check out this advanced technology found in Patchland. It's crazy. But that's all there really is to know about Prince Fluff and Yin-yarn. What do you think about Prince Fluff and Yin-yarn? Want to see them show up in a future Kirby game? Let me know in the comment section below. Like this video if you liked it, and subscribe for more. Have a good one!